So we're going to start with Christina Gamboa, who is the CEO of the Columbia GBC and the chair of the Americas Network. Christina?
Hello everyone. The work at the Americas Network has been on a journey, I would say. I guess we started a meeting 2 years ago. The network has roughly 21 members. Kind of 8 of them are established members. So one of the key subjects in the early journey was to work around capacity building. Basically transfer of knowledge between the more advanced members and the members that were getting going. But then we started figuring out and tried to organize the network around committees. And even though those committees didn't get much done in between meetings, we are very good at getting people to meetings, but sometimes there's no capacity to have time and do work in between meetings. We decided to rally around some resources that were offered by UNEP as GBCI to have an affordable housing baseline project around 5 different countries. So that's going to be published maybe in a month or so. And around that, then we decided to do some sessions around policy partnerships, actually. We did that in May when we last met. And basically, because what's been happening in the Americas is that we have migrated maybe from like the initial need for information about green building to more of a sense of getting the how to get the government involved and make it personal around getting policy right. So that has been a little bit of the evolution of the pathway of the network. And yes, I think that's that.
Thank you, Christina.
Those are the network members.
Next, I'd like to introduce Bruce Kurzweil, who is the chair of the Africa Regional Network.
Morning, everyone. The African Regional Network, in Africa there are 8 countries that are GBCs of some form. So there are 5 prospective GBCs, and there are 3 associated groups. And so the network is not a fully fledged network that's kind of resourced and capacitated as such, and it tends to play more of a role in terms of kind of, dealing with issues of how you set up green building councils. But just to kind of look at the broader picture there, the Africa Network deals with sub-Saharan Africa, and it tends to be dominated by 3 major countries, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, with a lot of countries with much smaller kind of economies. And most of the economies are growing very fast, but they're growing off quite a small economic growth, and they're having to put in massive kind of infrastructure. And I think that the overwhelming sort of determination when it comes to green building is that they want to put in buildings that are not going to be obsolete within a short space of time. And so it's a kind of a new wave of infrastructure, and the buildings need to kind of reflect that. I think, one could forgive some kind of cynicism in Africa for kind of maybe looking at this as another kind of Western concept that gets foisted on. We've had colonialism, we've had sort of structural adjustment, and now this sort of green building concept. And I think, but I think there's not. I think there's really a really good acceptance of green building because for a number of reasons. First of all, I think there's a sense that it's kind of going back to a more traditional way of building with more respect for nature and the environment. I think it meets a lot of the issues of a lack of infrastructure in Africa. So the new infrastructure that's coming out, a green building makes much more efficient use of infrastructure. And on a purely practical level, there is green buildings, there's quite a lot of supply disruptions to services in Africa, and green buildings being more kind of self-reliant and using less external services have a greater kind of resilience in that type of environment. I think the other thing that's really come out strongly is there's a determination that what happens in Africa needs to be very specific to Africa. And that's where some of the overwhelming challenges that a lot of the African countries face are these issues of social and economic, poverty and unemployment, health and education. And that's where the sort of impetus for the social and economic module came from, was sort of meeting that need in countries where that's the overwhelming societal challenge. And without sort of tackling that, green building is not really getting to grips with that society's issues. So, you know, I think that, and the other issue is housing, and I think that's something that the network is going to start getting to grips with. The whole issue, there's a lot of urbanization happening, and there's a lot of, you know, demand for new and lower income type of housing. I think that's a pressing sort of problem right through Africa that needs to be adjusted. So I think, you know, in conclusion, I think hopefully we're moving to something that's going to, as a network, we'll be fashioning something that's kind of quite relevant and fairly unique to Africa. And it's the first time that we're starting to see the beginnings of a real sort of green building movement and the starting the emergence of a network in Africa.
Next, I'd like to introduce Man Young, the manager of the Asia Pacific Regional Network.
Hello everyone. First confession, someone asked me in the audience this morning is that my real name, Man Young? And I said yes. And more importantly, I'm very happy that in Asia, they do call me Young Man, okay? Look, honestly, Asia Pacific Network, we're still quite young. We really just reconnected basically about 2.5, 3 years ago with the help of Australia GBC and Singapore GBC being our chair and co-chair. My involvement has been in the last year and a half. We literally had an annual event once a year in September, and we recently had one which is the biggest turnout for our network. Currently, where we stand, 17 GBC across Asia Pacific. We have basically an influence potential of 5.8 billion people around the world. That's more than, I think, 50% of the world population. And I think it was at the time that we did a stock take about what we want to actually look at as a network, what some of the challenges and common shared opportunities we have. And I think moving forward, the key thing for us as a network is to really learn from mature GBCs like Australia and New Zealand that's kind of gone on their own journey now as an industry-led initiative, to the extreme of, you know, China, which is government-led network and GBC, India being very much industry-led, and then you have someone in between like Singapore, which is a red dot, which is kind of have their own little balance of government-led, now industry-supported and really networked, but it's showing some really example of there's no one right answer about whether it's industry-led or government-led. In our networks, we're all coming with the same common goals, and it's about pulling and collaborating together and how we can actually connect the dots and really create this co-creation about some of the initiatives. Hong Kong is here as well, and I think the last 2 years of my exposure to the network, Hong Kong now with the new government leadership and China being there as a partner is becoming much more active. There's much more engagement in the industry, and I think the next kind of 12 months focus for us is to really learn more from all of you and leverage and tap into what your network has already established and progressed and get some key lessons learned. But for us, I think as a network, we believe one of the key focus is to make sure that we get government engagement. Because in Asia, we don't get that support, everything else kind of becomes secondary. So yeah, that's our challenge.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce Mohammed Asfour, chair of the MENA Regional Network.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and sorry for forgetting myself outside. The weather was beautiful. Now, I'm here together with several members of our network. We've got Michelle from Qatar, Saeed Al-Abbar from the UAE GBC, the vice chairman of the network, and the UAE GBC, Mr. Ahmed Al-Julu there, and we've got Treem from Tunisia. Now, I come from a region which is facing many challenges. When it comes to water, I think 4 or 5 of the 10 most deprived countries in water resources in the world are in our region. When it comes to energy, some of the highest consumption levels and carbon footprint per capita are also in the region. So you have this culture of consumption that we really have to deal with, and that's not an easy task, especially since energy is subsidized in many parts of our region. Now, the other challenge we're facing has to do with good governance. Not all of our countries have this culture of establishing civil society organizations that could promote the adoption of green building practices. And what also adds to all of that, what we've been witnessing in some of the countries that we were hoping would be leading the green building movement in the region. We were expecting a lot from Egypt, for example. We were expecting a lot from Syria. I'm sure there's still a good activity in Tunisia. So it has really been difficult to function within these circumstances. However, we still have been able to get together, maybe not as many councils as we would like to, but enough to maintain a certain level of momentum. 4 of us, for example, met in Cairo before the recent coup and agreed on including, or we were lobbied together in pushing forward the issue of sustainable buildings in a UNEP Arab League 10-year plan. So there have been activities that have been taking place. We've been doing a lot of work in terms of joint knowledge sharing, training, capacity building, and we've been assisting each other even within these difficult circumstances to improve and become better. Thank you.
And you all know Paul, who is also chair of the Europe Regional Network. Paul?
Thanks, Michelle. Well, we formalised the Europe Network back in, I think it was June 2010. And I think it's fair to say that the early meetings were slightly chaotic, somewhat like herding cats, as the expression goes. And I think at that point it struck me, and I think it's a really important point, that although we think of Europe as a fairly homogenous region, within that there is huge diversity, enormous diversity. And I'm sure that's true of all the regions, and it's very easy if you sit outside of those regions to assume that others are more homogenous than perhaps they are. So although there are lots of areas of common interest, there are very, very important differences as well. And I think that's something to remember. Perhaps the biggest unifying factor of all for us in Europe is the EU. Of course, not all member councils and countries are part of the EU. We've actually gone in the region from 0 to 36 green building councils in the last 6 years. So pretty extraordinary growth and expansion across the region. And that includes the majority of member states in the EU, but obviously there are some councils that fall outside of that. But either way, those countries are likely to continue to be very much affected by policy that's being formulated at the EU level. So most of our national regulation and policy pertaining to buildings and carbon emissions reductions and jobs in this sector and so on, a lot of that will emanate from Europe and affect us to a significant extent. For that reason, we've made policy one of our key strategic priorities. I'm delighted that we now have the resource that is James Drinkwater, member of the World GBC team, working with us, focused on Brussels policy and now adding value to the network in all sorts of other ways as well. And we've been coming together to inform the EU position on some pretty detailed but very important bits of policy, things like the Energy Efficiency Directive, things like the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive 2, and recently on a consultation specifically on sustainable buildings. And I think our ambition is to be one of the leading voices, one of the first go-to places for the Commission in terms of informing positions and policies in our area. Another area that's emerged as a strategic priority for us is around education. And through our own education task force, we have decided to create a common education platform, and there's been some terrific collaboration between GBCs to now create education materials and resources that are endorsed by the World GBC Europe region, which now member councils can take forward and use and obviously derive revenue and other things from in their countries, which is a great step forward. Our third strategic priority is what we call community, and this covers a whole multitude of different activities. It may be coming together, for example, with the Dutch GBC around initiatives to engage the finance and the banking community. It may be about putting together joint events, and it also involves us coming together on a regular basis, face-to-face, and when we do that now, those meetings are hosted by member councils who organise an open office where they share their own practices and their own experiences, and that's incredibly valuable, obviously, for those taking part. A lot of this has been made possible by the support of our sponsors, and we've been able to attract now 5 sponsors who are renewing their commitment to the network annually. Each of these is committing €30,000 a year to the network, and those are E.ON, Knauf, Saint-Gobain, Skanska and UTC. And I should emphasise that a condition of them becoming sponsors is that they continue to support all of the national GBCs in the countries where they operate. So this is all in addition to their support at the national level. One does not cannibalise or duplicate the other. I just remain to thank Dom, who is a fantastic resource as our Europe Network Manager, and James, as I say, for his work, particularly on policy. But I think we're really beginning to make some progress.
Thank you, Dom. I know one thing that's come up a few different times, discussions at various networks, and so we all know that the Europe Network, has these sponsors and sponsors their work, and the question comes up is, how do they get these sponsors? Can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to get that going?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and it's something that we've been discussing in the context of the World GBC more generally, is it may seem obvious, but it's important to think that you need a plan before you get the money. It's very hard to go and say, give us the money, trust us, we'll do wonderful things. You kind of need to show what those ideas and what those plans look like. So we spend a bit of time trying to figure out what our priorities would be. And then, of course, we went to companies who knew us well. We targeted companies precisely because they were already supporting multiple GBCs across the region. In many cases, these are companies that have been involved in the establishment as founder members of many councils. So they knew the GBC family quite well. They also recognised already that the GBCs come in all different shapes and sizes and flavours. Of course, that's one of our strengths. It's also sometimes one of our weaknesses, that we represent national priorities. We are created in the culture and the context locally, but increasingly we're trying to collaborate more widely. And as I say, that's both a challenge and an opportunity, I think. So I think the other key thing that we did was to manage their expectations. And I think we actually went out of our way to downplay their expectations, to say these are very early days. We are not a great organisation. We are not particularly well organised right at the beginning. And then hopefully anything that followed was better than they expected. And we've involved them in our meetings, and they are there as not only a sponsor but as a critical friend. And I really value that input. It keeps us real, it keeps us in touch with what our customers actually want and need from us. And they can help contribute to those discussions. And I haven't seen any of them abuse that position. So I think that's been a very good relationship.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor up to questions. Is there any questions that you might have for one of us to find out anything more about what's happening in some of the networks? I've got some things I could keep asking them, but I want to give you a chance to pose it to any of our chairs. All right, then I'm going to keep going because I'm interested. One of the things, Bruce, did you mention, for example, that of smaller, small, less established councils, and it affects the dynamics of your region. And I noticed, Christina, you guys are trying to have a similar issue with councils not having capacity to contribute to larger network projects. And you seem to be, so you are addressing that through the capacity building sessions? Is that the way? And I'm wondering, how do you see that in the future of your council? Is that something you would recommend to other networks as work on focusing, building up, using your network meeting for that time?
I mean, definitely why the network still sticks together is because we see the value of collaboration. We understand this is important, right? But what we have also understood on the journey in these past two years, it's also that we need to find what we're good at working together, but at different levels. So those who may need more capacity building stuff in terms of getting to being a prospective member, we try to group them to have a dialogue between each other. And also in the platform of the established members, what can we contribute them to make that journey faster? So I think definitely it's a yes. But what we have done is not divide the network, but have like subgroups that are more in a dialogue. Actually, for example, here in this meeting, none of the Central American representatives are here because they don't have the money to travel. They want to be here, but they don't have the resources. So they recently got this project together where they are getting money from the Canadian government on a platform where they're going to collaborate and have at least one of their representatives as a group be in these meetings because they do want to be here. So we try and catch up with that information of what is happening and channel it through so if other countries can participate and aid in that, help them move faster. So yes, capacity building and at different levels. Maybe sometimes we may have a dialogue between, I don't know, Brazil and Colombia, that maybe we should start getting some housing rating tools going. So we talk, we collaborate, we see other examples, and we share. So we still have to find a way to communicate that to the rest of the network when we have those like mini hubs, because I don't see this network as a one network, but maybe a hub and spoke and mini hubs that is going to continue building that capacity forward.
Thank you. Man, I was interested in, so we talked with Christina, they have some capacity building sessions at their network meetings, and I know you guys have tend to structure some sessions with government, is that right? So bringing government leaders together. So can you tell us a little bit about those sessions?
Sure, yeah, and I think, as I mentioned, Asia-Pacific in particular, around Asia, I think government engagement is quite key, given the cultural and the way that, I guess, Asian mindsets and political systems. We do involve governments representation where possible, and I think using Singapore as a good example, Li Shan shared with you, having that link is quite key because it links back not just your rating tool to the building code, but you get someone within that government ministry to be an advocate as well. It drives the whole industry because developers, whether it's a foreign investor or local developer, we are looking at the value add to why go green, why invest in green, and this whole productivity study that we keep talking about creating the space that can be more, how do you measure productivity? That's still, I'd say, very much in confusion. You talk to an investor, on one hand, that gets it, see value, but you talk to a local developer that's in Asia, don't see it. It's seen as a ticket box and buying a badge. So I think we have those extremes. But I think the school program that we just heard is a good example of how where we want to move to next. How do we continue to engage the dialogue with governments, but help them come up with policies that encourage behavior change? Not just as the investor, but also as a developer, but as an occupier of space. Okay, and that's something we want to focus more on and actually work on more as a network. How do we help governments encourage behavior change in the whole industry?
Thank you. I'm conscious of the fact that we only have a couple minutes, so I'm just going to wrap up with a few last questions. I'd like to ask Mohammed, so your network has been, particularly your steering committee formed a bit over a year ago, but quite active over the last year. What would you like to see your network, where would you like to see your network in, say, 3 or 5 years from now?
Okay. We learn a lot of ecosystems. So unless you have the right ingredients in place, it's very difficult to grow and expand in the future. So what I'd like to see is more passion, more ability from within the MENA countries. And this, I hope, would result in more activity on the network level and on the steering level side. I'd also like to see more understanding, perhaps, from within these countries by different stakeholders, by governments, by syndicates, on the important role these GBCs are playing, so that so everybody could work on achieving a common objective that would benefit the region as a whole. Thank you.
Since I was the one who set up the schedule and the strict timelines, I have 1 minute left and I'm going to stick to that. So we're going to have one last question. And that is for Bruce. Can you tell us where you would like to see the Africa network in about 5 years' time?
Well, you know, the networks are, I mean, the councils are still at a very early stage. So clearly one would like to see a lot of development happening and see the green building councils moving up through the ranks. One of the issues that we've come up with is that a lot of the countries they're quite small. The economies are quite small, and the private sectors are quite small. And the traditional world GBC model for building a GBC is quite onerous. One of the issues with the small private sector also is that it's very difficult to get sponsorship. So we're actually looking at possibly a different type of a model, which similar to what Christina was talking about, a kind of a hub and spoke. I think Eric Noir is calling it a GBC in a box, where the GBC sets itself up, has full transparency and governance and board and what have you, but relies more on some of the bigger GBCs and maybe they're kind of regional hubs for some of the services such as rating tools and things. So it's to try and facilitate the process in as many countries in Africa as possible.
Okay, well with that, thank you all very much. And if anyone has any questions, of course, I encourage you to ask them. And we look forward to more action from the networks.
Now, I'm a little bit jealous, but I should also thank Dominica for all what she's doing to support the network as well, and all of the World GBC staff.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.